Back in my day, polymer clay videos were much harder to come by, so I've had to learn most of what I know through trial and error. I've spent so many hours sculpting things that are no longer with us because of irreversible mistakes I made. So here are 22 things I wish I knew before I started sculpting. Step away from the Mod Podge. And while we're at it, put the clear nail polish down. I don't care what variation of Mod Podge you use, or how good of a brand your nail polish is. Neither of these materials is compatible with polymer clay, and you should not be using them to coat your beautiful creations that you put so much effort into sculpting. Yes, it may look good at the beginning, but then they seem to have some kind of weird chemical reaction when exposed to the clay for too long, and they eventually get mushy and tacky, and they crack, and they get discolored. I had to learn this on my own long ago, and unfortunately I don't have any examples to show you because they all got so sticky and gross that I had to throw my sculptures away. It was a really sad time for me. If you want to coat your clay with something, just use polymer clay glaze or resin. Resin is beautiful, but it's also super toxic, so please be very careful and do your research before using it. I have an entire course about epoxy and UV resin that I'll link in the description, but you know what's safe and looks fine? Polymer clay glaze. Just use polymer clay glaze. You shouldn't store raw polymer clay in the wrong type of plastic container. And of course, again, I learned this one the hard way. I initially bought these clear drawers to put my clay in, and I thought I was being cute and aesthetic. And then the raw clay melted the plastic. I remember taking out some clay one day, and there was this sticky goo underneath the package. At the time, I wasn't 100% sure that the gooey material was the plastic because I didn't know that could happen and it sounded ridiculous. So instead, I chose to believe that my room was too hot and the clay somehow separated really bad. Now after this happened, I was super disappointed because my beautiful new drawers were destroyed, but I still kept my clay in them because what was I supposed to do? Toss them out because they're uglier now? I don't want to be wasteful. Anyway, a couple months later, I finally accepted that the plastic was definitely breaking down and turning into goo, and come to find out, that melted mess is supposedly toxic and you shouldn't really touch it. I ended up cleaning them out and now I use them for other supplies, and I now store my clay in a regular drawer. Apparently, this only happens with certain types of plastic. I store a lot of my clay in plastic condiment containers, and I don't have any issues with that. And again, this is only an issue with raw clay. Baked polymer clay doesn't do this, so you don't need to worry about that. But yeah, just be cautious of the container you store your clay in. Liquid polymer clay really is worth the hype. I used to think it was just for making fake icing, but it can be used for so much more. I use it to soften polymer clay that's too firm or dry, and I love using it as glue when I want to attach pieces of clay to one another. You can also bake liquid clay on its own, and I do this to make miniature ice cubes. Liquid polymer clay comes in many different colors, but I only use the clear or translucent ones because I feel like they're more versatile. Also, a little goes a long way. I've had this bottle for years. They don't even look like this anymore. Yes, you do have to condition your polymer clay every single time you're about to sculpt. And yes, it will give you carpal tunnel syndrome. I'm just kidding, but only a little bit. Conditioning is a tedious process, but it's actually really important. Basically, over time, the ingredients in polymer clay separate, and you need to mix them back up so that the clay can work the way it's supposed to. Conditioning also helps remove trapped air from the clay, and it gets the clay warmed up. All of this helps the polymer clay get to a workable consistency, and it ensures that your clay bakes evenly and doesn't crack while in the oven. Some brands take more time to condition than others, so depending on the amount of clay you need to condition and how firm it is, you may want to use tools instead of your hands. I usually use a little rolling pin for this, and afterwards, if the clay isn't warmed up enough, or if I'm using a larger amount of clay, I will also run it through my pasta machine a couple of times till it comes out smooth. If you spend a lot of time conditioning large amounts of polymer clay with your hands, you can end up straining them pretty bad over time. So if you don't have a pasta machine, I highly recommend getting one. Dust. Every sculptor's worst enemy. If I could make every piece of dust on this planet disappear, I would, but I can't. So here's the next best thing. Play with a piece of scrap clay before sculpting to remove dust from your hands. Clean off your work surface before you put anything on it. And clean off your tools. If dust ends up in your clay, my bad. When dust ends up in your clay, and it will, use a Q-tip dipped in rubbing alcohol to remove it. Yes, rubbing alcohol is flammable. No, you will not start a fire in your oven by doing this. We're only using a small amount of rubbing alcohol on the clay, and all the extra alcohol evaporates quickly. You can usually see that the clay isn't wet anymore, and at this point it's completely safe to put in the oven. If you've already baked your sculpture and then you notice that there's dust in it, it's too late for you. Throw it away. Kidding. You can use some really fine sandpaper or even your craft knife to carefully sand down the area that the dust is in. If the dust is just underneath the surface of the clay, you can even sometimes just use a Q-tip dipped in acetone to remove it. If your piece is shaded or textured, then sanding it down or using acetone will destroy it. So in that case, you're gonna have to gaslight yourself into believing the dust isn't there. I'm not kidding this time. There's really nothing else you can do, unfortunately. I'm so sorry. Translucent clay is the secret to making realistic food sculptures. Yeah, texture and shading and all that matters too, but translucent clay makes the biggest difference, in my opinion. Take a look at food around you. Food in nature. Those cookies your grandma baked. Almost nothing is entirely opaque. Translucent clay. I used to think that you could just put eye pins into the clay and they would stay there, but that is not true. And if you do that, they will easily fall out after baking. To get them to stay in place, I now bend the bottom of the eye pin before putting it in the raw clay. And this helps hold it inside the baked piece. On the topic of findings, make sure you use findings that won't tarnish. This is probably already obvious to many of you, but it wasn't to me, okay? I just wanted to use the cute findings, and I thought that silver-plated looked prettier than stainless steel. It only looks pretty for so long. I use stainless steel now. I mean, at the end of the day, just use the findings you want to use. Tarnish isn't permanent anyway, but if you don't want to keep cleaning it off, maybe opt for a metal that doesn't change colors. Silicone molds will change your life. Unless you don't sculpt repetitive stuff, then in that case, this means nothing to you. But for the rest of us, molds can make the sculpting process quicker and easier, especially if you sculpt original pieces, because this way they'll come out the same every single time. You can buy silicone molds online, like on Etsy, or you can get some kind of silicone mold maker to create your own. Many silicone molds and mold makers are also oven safe. So you can bake your clay or liquid polymer clay directly inside of them. Save your clay scraps. If you have small bits of clay left that are too dusty to fix, or pieces that didn't make the cut and can't be returned to their package, do not throw them out. They seem insignificant now, but over time you'll collect enough scrap clay to create new projects with. And you can paint over this recycled clay or cover it with a layer of new clay. I also love using scraps to sculpt pieces that I want to make a mold out of, so that I don't have to waste any of my new clay. You don't need fancy tools to be a skilled sculptor. They might help, but I feel like sometimes tools actually hinder me because I think too much about how to get the tool to do what I want it to, and I forget that I don't have to use the tool. Sometimes your hands or even things around your house can be more useful than store-bought equipment. Use popsicle sticks to roll out even sheets of polymer clay. I wish I thought of this one a lot earlier. Raw polymer clay can ruin desks and tables, so you want to work on top of a surface that will protect your workspace. Wax paper and parchment paper are a good disposable option, and you don't have to worry about cleaning them off because they can be replaced after every use. For reusable options, you can use polymer clay baking mats or silicone mats. These mats are also non-stick, and most are also oven safe. Another reusable option is to use a piece of tempered glass, because they're super easy to clean off. This is the type of surface I sculpted on for many years, until the accident. I have quite a few different sized pieces of glass that are all from the same brand, and they're all great and they've lasted for years. I ended up getting a little too comfortable though, because I purchased a new one from the same brand without actually checking if it was tempered or not, and it wasn't. Which I only realized after I bled all over the floor. So please be very careful if you choose this option, and make sure you're getting tempered glass because it's stronger than regular glass. And if it breaks, the pieces are not sharp and dangerous, and they won't cut you. After the glass debacle, I vowed to never sculpt on a piece of glass ever again, so I switched to ceramic tiles. Tiles are just as smooth and easy to clean as glass, but they're significantly sturdier. Just make sure you don't get tiles that have a design or a rough surface because they can leave marks on your clay. Also, I use pretty small tiles, but you can get much bigger ones. And just like the mats, tiles can withstand high temperatures, so you can bake your clay directly on top of them. Polymer clay mimics the surface it touches while baking, so a glossy surface, like a ceramic tile, will make the clay look shiny. And a matte surface like parchment paper will make the clay look matte. This isn't that big of a deal, especially if you plan on coating your baked clay with some kind of varnish, but if you don't, it might be something to keep in mind, because the rest of the clay that doesn't make direct contact with the baking surface won't have that same finish. An oven thermometer can be super helpful for baking polymer clay. I never needed to use this when I baked clay in my home oven because it was accurate, but if your oven temperature is a little off, you might want to get one of these. And if you bake your clay in a toaster oven, you definitely need a thermometer because they're almost never at the correct temperature. Also, oven thermometers themselves can be inaccurate, so I'd recommend testing yours out before using it with your oven, just to make sure it's reading the correct temperature. Direct heat from the oven's elements can cause polymer clay to scorch or become discolored. This issue doesn't occur with all ovens, but if it's happening with yours, you can easily prevent it by tenting your clay. All you have to do is use aluminum foil or thick paper to create a little tent that's large enough to cover your pieces, but still small enough that it isn't touching the oven's heating element. While we're on the topic of baking, a huge misconception that I hear all the time is that it's not safe to bake clay in a home oven. Polymer clay is non-toxic, and as long as you bake it at the correct temperature, it's completely safe to bake at home, even in the same oven you use for food. It does release a stronger smell while it bakes, but it isn't dangerous to breathe this in. Even if you set your oven a few degrees higher than you should, it is still safe. The clay may slightly darken in color, but it won't release any dangerous fumes. Polymer clay does, however, release fumes when it burns, and that can be dangerous. But these fumes are only released when you bake the clay at a significantly higher temperature than it's supposed to be at. For most polymer clay brands, around 350 degrees Fahrenheit is when the clay starts to burn. This is also when your clay fully scorches and turns black or really dark brown, and you'll also smell the burning clay. It's really strong, so you'll know when this happens. If you fully burnt clay before and now you're panicking, you're okay. I've burnt polymer clay before too. It's okay. You just want to do your best to make sure it doesn't happen again, but you're not gonna drop dead just because you've breathed it in once or twice. Everything's okay. If you do happen to burn your pieces, make sure to open up a bunch of windows and air out your house. And I'd recommend cleaning out your oven, especially if you also use it for food, because particles from the burnt clay can stick to the inside of your oven. You can bake polymer clay for longer than the instructions say to. Polymer clay does not burn if you're baking it at the correct temperature, even if you leave it in the oven for hours. Many artists purposely bake their clay for longer because it can help make the clay even stronger, so you don't need to worry too much about following baking times to a T. Although I will say, if you do this, it can cause the clay to slightly darken in color. This won't be that noticeable though, unless you're using a lighter colored clay like white or translucent. Underbaking is a significantly larger problem than baking for too long. If polymer clay is baked for less time than the package says, it will be prone to breaking. So personally, I think it's better to be safe than sorry and just bake for a little longer. Because polymer clay won't burn as long as it bakes at the right temperature, you can pre-bake and rebake the clay. Pre-baking is when you bake the raw clay for a short period of time so that it isn't soft anymore, but still not fully baked. The clay will be hard enough that you can hold it without smushing it, and this way you can build onto it without messing up everything you've already sculpted. Rebaking is pretty much the exact same thing, but after the clay has already been baked or pre-baked, and you can do this as many times as you need to. Pre-baking and rebaking times will depend on the size of your sculptures, and over time you'll figure out what works best for you. But I just put the clay in the oven for half or even a quarter of the time I would normally bake a piece of that size. Once you've finished working on your sculpture, you can ignore any time it has already spent in the oven and bake it following the regular instructions listed on your clay. This ensures that the newer parts of the sculpture bake all the way through. Of course, this clay may become slightly discolored during this process, and this could be noticeable with lighter colors, so keep that in mind. You don't suck at sculpting, you're just using the wrong clay. I won't go into extreme detail because I have an entire video about this topic that you can watch if you're interested, but every single line of clay is different, even if they are from the same brand. And you can't use the exact same type of polymer clay for every single sculpting project. Depending on what you're sculpting, the clay will need to have a specific consistency and certain qualities before and after baking. If you use a line of clay that isn't compatible with the type of project you're working on, it can impact your ability to sculpt properly, and your sculpture won't turn out as good as it would with the right brand. Okay, if you're using the right clay and your sculptures still don't look quite right, you may suck at sculpting just a bit, but that's okay. It's so easy to look at other people's artwork and feel bad that yours don't look as advanced, but you don't know how long it took them to get there. I know a lot of people don't like to hear this, but practice really is the answer to your troubles. You will get better, just be patient with yourself, and be kind to yourself. I do think it's good to compare your sculptures, but not to those sculpted by others, just to your own. You really don't realize how much better you're getting until you put your pieces side by side, and the more time that passes, the more noticeable your progress will be. Okay, that's everything I've got. I know I've changed your life for the better, and you're welcome. Goodbye.